Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a little bit of a chat discussion video, and it's about diversity in books. Part of what's inspired this video is that recently I have read a couple of books that are Asian inspired fantasy books, and I primarily read fantasy, and if a fantasy book is not so unique in its world building that it's like nothing you've ever seen, it's more than likely European influenced. And I love European inspired fantasy. If a new book comes out and it's an amazing book and it's European inspired, I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh geez, another one, I'm so done with it. No, I love European inspired fantasy. That said, I also think it's important that there is fantasy books that are heavily inspired by other cultures and by other races and by other countries. The downside though for me is that two of the books that I have read recently, The Poppy War and Tale of Shikanoko, that aren't European inspired fantasy but are influenced by Asian culture, I wasn't the biggest fan of those books. And I find often in books that do contain some form of diversity in them, people are a little afraid to admit when they don't think that the book is the absolute best it could have been, because they're afraid that in saying, I didn't love this book, that people are going to attack them and criticize them for not liking it because those people are racist, or those people are sexist, or those people are homophobic. But I do think that there's a fine line between acknowledging that a book has diversity and that that's a good thing, but not just throwing in a 5-star or 4-star rating to a book because it has diversity. I honestly don't think it does anybody any favors. Anybody from any walk of life, anybody of any skin color, anybody of any sexual orientation, I don't think it does anybody any favors to say that a book is good just because there's somebody of diversity in it, because essentially what you're saying is, well, the way I interpret it is that, oh, we don't need diverse books to be on par with excellent other books. We just need them to have diversity. At times, it almost comes across like publishing companies think that diversity is something that's on trend. So rather than signing people who are actually extremely talented authors and have an extremely unique and wonderful story, they'll sign somebody because basically they think, oh, it's popular now to have gay people in your stories, or it's popular now to have black people in your stories. So yeah, sign that book and pump it out, and really only market it as a book with gay people or a book with black people, and don't worry, it'll sell. Sometimes it comes across like publishing companies know that people want diversity, but rather than acknowledging that people want really well fleshed out diverse characters and they want really amazing world building that's influenced by different cultures, rather than acknowledging that, they just see this checklist of things that people are seeming to like all of a sudden, and then they go ahead and sign people and put out books because of that, rather than putting out really good quality books. Just to clarify too, I'm not saying that all publishing companies do this. I'm not saying that publishing companies are super evil and they're the worst, but they are a business, and at the end of the day, their goal is to make money. So they are going to try to sell what they think people want. But I think what people ideally want is really well represented characters, and they want really well represented worlds. They don't want authors to phone it in. They don't want publishing companies to phone it in. They don't want books that are mediocre or less and just happen to contain diversity. Where sometimes I've noticed reviewers can play into this is when they rate a book higher just because it has diversity, and they don't seem to actually look at how's the storytelling, how's the pacing, how's the world building, how's the actual mechanics of the writing. They don't really analyze those things sometimes when it comes to a diverse book. They say, this book has a lot of name whatever diverse person you want to think of. And that's not a book review. That's praising an element of the book, but that's not really diving into if the book is good quality. It's not dissecting the book and kind of presenting it in a way that's telling people what they may or may not like about it. It's just saying, this book has diversity, so, 5 stars. Now, I do think it can be a little bit intimidating for reviewers, especially reviewers who are nervous at hurting people's feelings or who want to be as sympathetic as possible and as understanding as possible. I think it can be a little scary to admit when a book that has some form of diversity isn't the best, because maybe it was so meaningful to somebody to finally feel represented that they don't want to hurt that person's feelings. And they also don't want that person to potentially attack them and accuse them of being racist or sexist or, name any other negative thing. They don't want to be accused of those things, and they also don't want to hurt people's feelings. So I think sometimes they might sugarcoat and say that a book is, or at least imply that a book is pretty good, even though really, if they're really holding it to the same standards of their rating scale for every other book they review, it really isn't. I kind of want to touch on too where authors play into this. As much as I'd like to assume that everybody has the same mindset as me and just wants their stories to be read and loved and just wants their characters to come to life in readers' minds, as much as I like to think that other writers are like that, some writers really do care about the money. Now, if you want to make writing a career, you of course care about the money a little bit, because if it's your job, it's your job, it's your means of income and how you feed yourself and provide for yourself. But if it purely comes down to the money and you do the same things I was accusing some publishing companies of possibly doing, I'm not really for that. Sometimes authors, rather than wanting to make amazing characters and amazing stories, their characters become a checklist. Do I have my gay character? Do I have my dark-skinned character? Do I have my character that doesn't really identify as male or female? We want those things in books, but we don't want it to become a checklist where that character has no depth and they can't be identified by anything other than the fact that they're diverse. To sum up, I think that as readers, it's important to make it clear that we care about diversity, but we care about diversity being done well. As anybody who makes an effort to review books, whether they review books formally on a blog or they do it on BookTube, or maybe they just do it on Goodreads or on Amazon, for anybody that takes the time to review a book, I personally think that in order to make it clear that we want characters that are diverse and we want diverse worlds without it just being phoned in, I think we have to be honest in saying, while I appreciated this element of the book, these other things were lacking, instead of saying, this book was great, loved this particular thing about it, and then not actually get into the fact that as a book overall, it might not have been that great. On the flip side, I think it's also important to note when a book is absolutely fantastic and then the story itself is amazing, but maybe there could have been more diversity. I think it's okay to say a book is good even though it didn't have diversity, and acknowledge that, because then you're saying, like, this book was really great, I would have loved it even more if it had diversity. Authors and publishing companies, while of course money is going to be a part of them selling books, I think it's important to acknowledge that it should never be trendy. It should never be just about making money when it comes to including diversity. What it should be about is telling a story and telling stories about real people, because even though it's fiction and these people aren't literally real, they're based off of humans. They're based off of human interaction. They're based off of how humans identify. They're based off of what humans look like. And that should always be the same, regardless of whether they include every form that they possibly can or whether they have a few forms of diversity. It shouldn't be about doing what's trendy. It should be about always, always, always telling stories with real people. That is, of course, my take on all of this. I would love for this to be a conversation. I would love for people to feel comfortable enough to share their opinions on this topic, because I only know what I know, as I've only lived my life, and everybody has lived different lives, and I think that if we can be open and happy and nice to each other, then it'll be so much easier to actually have a conversation about something like this. Anyway, that's it though. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day and happy reading. Bye guys.